Everybody. My name is Nancy Macano, and I'm welcoming you on behalf of the Bloomingdale Neighborhood History Group, an all-volunteer group dedicated to researching and communicating the history of the Bloomingdale neighborhood of the Upper West Side. Thank you for coming to this evening's program, From Tidal, Marsh to Idyllic Retreat, the story of Central Park's Harlem Meer, presented by Lane Adonisio, Vice President for Planning at the Central Park Conservancy. Before we begin, I'm going to quickly let you know about some upcoming events. On Sunday, August 14th, we have something new, our first ever homemade history exchange as part of the Open Streets program and co-sponsored with the Columbus Amsterdam Business Improvement District. This will be an in-person event on Amsterdam Avenue at 109th Street on the afternoon of August 14th from 1 to 4 p.m. We'll have historical photos and maps and other items, and volunteers to help you find out about things like the history of your block or your building. And we hope you will bring your own photos and other items to show us as a homemade history exchange. Then we have free local walking tours scheduled for Wednesday, August 31st and Wednesday, September 14th, both at 6 p.m. These are led by local historian Jim Mackin, author of the recently released book, Notable New Yorkers of Manhattan's Upper West Side. His walks are very informative and they're lots of fun. And finally, be on the lookout for our next newsletter, Bloomingdale Bulletin, coming out just after July 4th. A heads up that this issue includes a piece about our own neighborhood's unlikely part in the radium craze of the early 1900s. There are more programs in the works for the fall. You'll be able to find out about all of them on our website, upperwestsidehistory.org, where you can also sign up to be on the mailing list to receive announcements and the newsletter. Tonight's program is hosted by Wynn Armstrong, a founding member of the Bloomingdale Neighborhood History Group, now in its 22nd year. If you want to ask a question or make a comment tonight, please use the Q&A or chat function on Zoom, and Michael Gonzalez will moderate. And in the interest of getting things underway, I turn it over to Wynn.
Thanks, Nancy, and welcome, Lane Adonisio, and all of you. So who uses Central Park? The park is visited by roughly 42 million times a year by approximately 10 million people of all ages, coming from the 5 New York City boroughs, as well as from every state and from almost every country in the world. Some come just once and some come daily and in between. We walk, jog, run, bicycle, fish, swim, roller and ice skate, ski, play tennis and all kinds of ball, listen to, dance to, and make music, jazz, rock, folk, classical, and more, alone in small, large groups. We picnic, walk dogs, visit the woods and monuments, watch and photograph the 210 kinds of birds that live in and seasonally migrate through the park, play in the 21 playgrounds that grace Central Park, admire the over 170 varieties of trees, smell the flowers, and just relax and be. Who keeps count and plans for all this so that each can enjoy themselves while leaving space for the others, plant, animal, and human? Lane Adonisio, Vice President for Planning in the Central Park Conservancy, not alone, but a principal. Our speaker today oversees the research and planning for park-wide and project planning. The Conservancy, as you may know, works with the New York City Department of Parks to sustain Central Park. Lane is the author of the 2011 report on the public use of Central Park, Links to that extensive report and others are on tonight's chat line. Thanks to Lane. And you can also Google them. Lane will talk with us tonight about the most northern section of Central Park, the Harlem Meer, the North Woods, the Lasker Pool and Rink, and the communities that use and cherish them, and their histories, present condition, and plans in process for their and our future use. We'll have time after Lane's talk to share observations and questions. Lane, take it from there.
Okay, thank you, Anne, and great to be here tonight talking about my favorite topic, Central Park. I am in my 20th year here at the park, and I work in our planning, design, and construction office, mostly with the people who are professional designers and construction professionals, landscape architects, and I'm a planner, and I get to focus on the big picture and to talk to the people who use the park and to look at the history and really kind of think about the purpose of the park and how we kind of continue to provide that to all of the different users and groups who use the park. So I'm going to start just by orienting us. I presume that for people who've tuned in for a talk about the Harlem Meer, probably many, if not most, are familiar. But just to orient, or for those who are just curious about this landscape, Harlem Meer is located in the northeast corner of the park. Across the bottom of your screen here is Fifth Avenue. This is a view. We're looking west. To the right here is 110th Street. The Harlem Meer is one of the several naturalistic water bodies in the park, lakes and ponds. It's a water body. It's about 11 acres. It has this sort of L-shaped shape, and it kind of wraps around this landscape here known as the Fort Landscape, and we'll talk a little bit about why it's called that, of these sort of rocky bluffs and overlooks. And I'm finding that I do not seem to be able to get out of this screen and move the
Try using the arrows.
slides forward. I'm sorry?
Try using your keyboard arrows, I think.
My keyboard arrows, which I'm trying as well. And that seems not to work. So I think what I may do is stop sharing for a second. If I can. Apologies. And I'm going to start sharing again. I'm sorry, my mouse will not seem to go over to the other screen. So let's see. Okay. Having technical issues. Apologies.
When you switch desktops, they might have switched which way you have to scroll over.
Right. So for some reason, my pointer will not go off of the screen that I'm on onto the other screen. So I'm going to try. I'm going to try minimizing that.
Worth waiting for. We've seen it.
Apologies. It actually was working just fine before, and let's see. Okay, now I think we're getting there. View. Zoom. Okay. So I am my mouse, it just seems to be stuck in the
Going
other monitor.
Try going the opposite direction towards the other end of the screen. And then see if it goes to that monitor.
I see what you're saying. It did. And now I'm going to try to, I see. Okay, somehow left is right and right is left. Okay. Bear with me.
Cultural challenge.
I am going to turn off presenter view so it doesn't take up my whole and view full screen. And I'm going to share my screen again.
Anticipation is growing.
Are you
Okay, well,
seeing the presentation? Okay, my sincere apologies. Somehow left is right and right is left on my computer, I think. We're going to do it this way. So here we are again. So we were just getting oriented to the Meer in the northeast corner of the park. Walking through a few views. For those familiar with the Meer, you may know it as an idyllic spot designed to kind of serve the park's essential purpose to provide the people of the city with a reprieve from the stresses of urban life. A serene water body overlooked by dramatic rock outcroppings. At the top of these outcroppings, these overlooks. So maybe you've spent time in the park, or maybe if you come tomorrow, you'll come sit on a rock like this gentleman here. Are you seeing my pointer? Yes. Or up on the rustic overlooks. Maybe you use some of the facilities at the Meer, or will come and visit one of our playgrounds. The Dana Discovery Center, where we have programs, discovery programs, catch and release fishing, all sorts of exhibits. Or maybe you swim at Lasker Pool or skate in the winter when it's a rink. And so what we're going to do tonight is just sort of go through and tell the story. And as I was saying earlier, you know, in my work at the Conservancy, I'm often talking and working with the people rebuilding and restoring the park, and talking to the people as we do this who use the park and all of the different users, and trying to address sort of all of the different individual user needs and interests, but also the one kind of common universal thing that the park has done for over 150 years, and that I think really does connect so many of the people who use the park, even if it is in these more specific ways. And it's what the park was designed essentially to do, which was to be a reprieve from the city. And it was designed. The park is a design landscape. So I think many people who aren't New Yorkers, or who have not spent a lot of time in the park, maybe think that it's just nature, the part of the city that they left alone. But for those who do know that the park is designed, you may be familiar with the names Frederick Law Olmsted and Calvert Vaux, who won a competition in 1858 to design the Central Park, which was how it was initially referred, for New York City. And they were the winning entry among 33 entrants was their plan, which they called the Greensward Plan. And their plan was distinguished from a number of the other entries in several key ways that are some of the kind of key sort of aspects of the design that really make it what is today known as a really sort of celebrated landscape and actually a work of art. And those kind of distinguishing characteristics were the way that they designed this composition of landscape scenery, combination of scenic meadows. This is the sheep meadow, serene water bodies. This is the lake at 72nd Street. And then interspersed with more rugged landscapes like the Ramble. And these were all woven into a composition of scenery that was designed to convince people who visited the park momentarily that or for a day that they had left the city and that they were transported someplace else. And another really key aspect of their design that really probably more than any other differentiated it from the other designs for the park was the way that they handled the transverse roads that cross the park. The competition required that there be 4 roads to carry east-west traffic across the park, and every single one of the other designs would have divided up the park so that every 15 blocks or so, you'd have to cross a street. And what Olmsted and Vaux did that was really so ingenious was to depress these and sink these roadways, and then through topography and vegetation, screen the roads from the park so that the park would be what it was intended to be, this one continuous experience, and people would be able to go to the park and spend a day wandering around and feel that they had left the city and gone to the countryside. And so, I mentioned that the park is a work of art, and we often kind of talk about works of art, and in talking about the park, there's often kind of discussion of the brilliant design and Olmsted and Vaux, and I think the thing that's really, for me, as somebody working in the park, that makes me care, and that I think that makes the work of art important is not just that it's a work of art because it's not just about aesthetics and it's not just about this famous people designed it, but what Olmsted and Vaux said is that they were designing the park as a single work of art, but that as such it would be it was subject to the law of every work of art, that it should be framed on a single noble purpose. And that's what we really focus on when we focus on how to restore and rebuild the park and make it really serve the people that it was built and designed for, is what is that purpose. And Olmsted and Vaux, in writing about the park and writing about their work, they kind of pose the question, what could be so important, what purpose could matter so much as to remove from the normal kind of building up of the city, from the real estate market, such a large area in what was anticipated to be the future center of the city. And they gave this reason, and it's a lot of text, but I'll kind of quickly to get through it. They said, the answer to the question can be found in the expectation that the whole island of New York would, but for such a reservation, before many years, be occupied by buildings and paved streets, that millions upon millions were to live their lives upon the islands, millions more go out from it only occasionally and at long intervals, and that all of its inhabitants would surely suffer in greater or less degree according to their occupations and degree of their confinement to it from the influences engendered by these conditions. So what they're saying is, for people whose stations in life would confine them to the city, that they would suffer without a great park. And so the park that they designed and created met this need by creating these expansive open spaces for all of the people of the city to enjoy. And it was designed as a place for recreation, which we tend to think of nowadays. We use the word recreation often to mean active recreation and sports and getting your blood pressure up. But at the time when the park was created, the word recreation actually came from the idea of recreation, and it was about recreating one's sense of well-being and connection to nature. Was that this initial idea of recreation? So when they talk about recreation and the primary purpose of the park being for healthful recreation, and it's for all the inhabitants of the city, they're talking about a very specific design intent that is to create an opposite to urban conditions. And so when we talk about the design of Central Park, what's just really important about it is what it's meant to achieve and for whom, which is the sense of escape and for everybody. And so we think about this in particular, and as we go through and look at the history of the park as a whole, and certainly at the Harlem Meer, and we think about the changes that it has gone through and how we continue to kind of to restore and rebuild it. It's not that there was no place for active recreation and sports, but the creators of the park described that sports and active recreation in which comparatively few can take part would only have a place in the park to the extent that they don't detract from and that they actually contribute to the majority of those visiting the park. And a great example of this is skating, and we're going to talk about skating at Lasker, and we're going to talk about skating on the Meer. This is skating on the lake. All of the at 72nd Street, all of the lakes and ponds in the park were designed to appear like nature and to make people feel connected to nature and that they'd escape the city. But they were also, in a sense, recreation facilities in that they were designed for skating, and they were designed to be able to be lowered to more reliably freeze. And in the early days of the park, the most popular activity and the highest attendance days were days in the winter where there was skating on the lakes and ponds was by far the most popular activity. And I just like this painting. It's a 1934 painting by Agnes Tate called Skating in Central Park. It's also the lake. But what I like about it is it really shows that idea that yes, people are engaged, in a recreational activity that not everybody is participating in, but it's in the context of nature and the landscape, and everybody, the people in the landscape, the people on the bridge, everybody is sort of participating, and it's increasing everybody's pleasure and bringing people together, not dividing people up into kind of isolated and inward focused recreation facilities. So that's something that we think about as we look to the way that the Meer, for example, has evolved over time, and as we continue to think about its future. And so finally, it's the one great purpose of the park to supply the hundreds and thousands of tired workers who have no opportunity to spend their summers in the country, a specimen of God's handiwork that shall be to them inexpensively what a month out of town in the White Mountains or the Adirondacks is at great cost to those in easier circumstances. So just spent a few minutes here, but really to just kind of focus on the purpose of the park. Olmsted and Vaux were the designers of the park, and they were designing it, but they were not the people who conceived of the park or conceived of that purpose. And so this is actually an announcement in 1853 of something coming to fruition that had been in the works for a number of years. So really since the late 1840s and early 1850s, a number of influential citizens in the city had been advocating for a great park for the purposes that we just discussed, to be a place for the people of the city to escape to. And so this is actually an announcement in 1853. It was in July that the state of New York authorized the city to purchase the site of Central Park and to create a board of commissioners to oversee the creation and management of the park. And one of the things that you may notice, since we're talking about the Harlem Meer today, and the Harlem Meer is located at the corner of the park at the northern end at 110th Street, is if you look at if you look at the site, that the site doesn't go up to 110th Street historically. So initially the land taken from the park was between 59th and 106th Streets. But very early on, the commissioners who had been appointed to oversee the park began eyeing the land between 106th and 110th Street. The top is a woodcut of the original Greensboro plan from 1858. At that very time, the Board of Commissioners were already advocating to extend the park from 106th Street up to 110th Street. Basically, they kind of made the argument that that the northern end of the park was very rocky, that if lots were divided and building was to happen on this area, that it would obscure the views. This was also a swampy area in the corner here. So between the rocks and the swamps, they also kind of made the argument that it would be very expensive to develop this land. And so the park was extended from 106th Street to 110th Street. And so to orient ourselves in the park that we know today to what this added portion of the park is, I've just kind of thrown a red dotted line here where the original site for the park would have ended and how it was extended. And you see that it's really occupied by the Harlem Meer and much of the North Woods. What was this site historically? This is a map of the park from 1857 on which we have overlaid the North Woods, so you can kind of imagine the park on top of it, and the series of watercourses and water bodies, the Harlem Meer, our site that we're focused on today, which was the body of water into which a series of water bodies that began with the 100th Street Pool on the west side and flowed through the North Woods through the lock and emptied into the Harlem Meer. And this was created, Olmsted and Vaux designed this series of waterways, and it was created along the course of an ephemeral stream course called Montaigne's Rivulet that had entered the park at around 101st Street and Central Park West, flowed in a northeasterly direction, and then turned and merged up with the Harlem Creek, which was a watercourse that then continued into the Harlem River and passed through this swampy area here. So this is what the Meer was. It was sort of a low basin containing a tidal marsh that connected over to the Harlem River and the East River and Hell's Gate, and it was overlooked by this landscape here that was added to the park when it was extended, that included fortifications, a line of defenses built actually during the Revolutionary War by the British during the British occupation of New York City. Initially, these earthwork fortifications, and then they were actually rebuilt by the Americans in the War of 1812 with these particular fort locations, these redoubts: Fort Clinton, Nutter's Battery, and Fort Fish. To give you a sense of what, I'm going to go back for a second, looking from right about this line north towards Harlem, you get a sense of what that landscape looked like. Nutter's Battery here, these rocky, rugged fortifications. Fort Clinton over here, and this is where the land and the ground kind of quickly dropped off and became lower, and we're facing the Harlem Plains. There would have been at the foot of these hills would have been that swampy area. And here's a painting from around the era of the War of 1812. This is from Fort Fish, looking towards Nutter's Battery and Fort Clinton. And Harlem Plains. I'm going to go back for a second. Neglected to mention the Old Post Road, or the Kingsbridge Road, one of two main north-south arteries in going up and down the Isle of Manhattan, the other being the Bloomingdale Road, that passed through the site and through this line of embankments at a place called McGowan's Pass. And there was a gatehouse at McGowan's Pass, and there's McGowan's Pass. So that's the history of the rocky landscape overlooking the forts. By 1863, the extension had finally been authorized by the state, and as the park was being constructed, you see there's this wonderful series of maps as the park is being constructed, showing the areas colored in are the areas that are completed, and you can see the beginnings of the lock. The pool is finished, the lock shoreline is being built, and the outlines of the Harlem Meer. And from an 1867 atlas of the city, just included this just to show that as this part of the park is being built out, that the fortifications, this old line of earthworks, which was they were earthworks, so it's earth, it's rocks. There were kind of remnants of the fortifications, and they were included in the park kind of as objects of interest. In the annual report of 1864, they said the remains of these works that so much enhance the interest of this section of the park will, as far as practicable, be preserved. So there were not the extensive paths that we have to this area, but there were the old fortifications overlooking the Harlem Lake or the Meer. Taking just a step back from 1873 view of the park. So the interconnected system of water bodies, the pool and the lock and the Meer, were created by along that line of that ephemeral stream course Montaigne's rivulet, excavating to create these basins, constructing a naturalistic shoreline, and then directing both stormwater and water from the Croton aqueduct system that was on its way to the reservoir in Central Park, was diverted to supplement the water and create this system of water bodies. And the water flowed from the pool, underneath an arch under the drive, through the Northwoods, through the lock, under Huddlestone Arch here, and then it continued, the stream course continued until it reached a rustic bridge and then emptied into the Harlem Meer. And what those landscapes were like is walking through into the Northwoods alongside the lock, these open pools of water and cascades that flowed through the Northwoods. And at the very end, this is that arch that carries the drive over the stream course and a pedestrian path. This is Huddlestone Arch, a really kind of fabulous rustic arch made really from boulders assembled from the landscape, and it's dry laid, so they all support each other. There's no mortar, so this really naturalistic arch through which you would pass. And this is an early view of the rest of that stream course and that rustic bridge, the Harlem Meer and 110th Street. And then as the landscape filled in more, that a similar view. So a really just a rustic moment and a real hallmark of the design of the park to create this sequence of experiences that would increase your anticipation as you get to this arch, and then to go from the intricacy of the woodlands and this kind of rugged stream course to the broad open expanse of water of the Harlem Meer. Looking back, once you were at the Harlem Meer, if you looked back, you would see this ravine, and you might glimpse before the vegetation grew in. You might glimpse Huddlestone Arch. So this is looking south across the Meer. This is actually the site today to orient us of or was the site of the Lasker Pool and Rink. But this was the experience, and this is that site around the turn of the century, and you really get a sense of how the scenic, serene, rural character of the park enabled everyday New Yorkers to feel transported really a world away from the busy, crowded city, which was the purpose of the park. And a couple of things that I will just kind of point out here. You'll notice the naturalistic edge of the Meer. This is as much as possible meant to just seem like it's a lake out in the Adirondacks or the White Mountains. You'll notice as well that on the South Shore, the landscape and the rock outcrops drop right down directly to the water. There's no path at this time on that edge. Another view looking across to Fort Clinton. This is that Fort Clinton overlook in 1910. And again, you get a sense of just the park and this landscape as an idyllic retreat from the city. And there was skating on the Meer. This is a view looking north towards 110th Street, the northeast corner. And as I said, all of the water bodies were designed to be able to be skated on. And it wasn't until the mid 20th century that rinks started to be built in order to ensure that we could kind of more reliably have water bodies freeze and skate on them. A view from the late 1920s. By this time, you can see that that the popularity of boating has increased. There's a boathouse has been built. You still see the fort landscape and the rock outcrops, touching down to the water. And another view. And one of the things that you're starting to see here is and it's something that we, that is a challenge in the history of the park, is how to maintain this idea of this rural idyllic retreat in the context of heavy use and increasing population. So one of the things that you actually see is you start to see this stone edge being put up around the edge of the Meer to deal with erosion and compaction from heavy use. And in the 1940s, this really kind of reaches at the Harlem Meer. It reaches another level in terms of just that hardening. Robert Moses becomes Parks Commissioner in 1934. There is, during this period, throughout Central Park and throughout parks, a real focus on recreational facilities. So you see playgrounds are added in the 30s, and in the mid 1940s, the entire Meer was encircled in a concrete retaining wall. You see this path is added along the edge of that landscape that had directly met the water. The entire Meer is encircled in a paved path. A lot of it has fencing around it. A much larger boathouse is built. So you see the construction of the larger boathouse, reinforcement with concrete, still picket fencing around much of the boundary. And this is the landscape by the 1960s. It's dramatically transformed from what it was originally. It does still continue to serve as a valuable recreational resource for the surrounding community. I mean, you can see that the park is busy. You can see that people are boating at this time. But between the hardening of the shoreline, the proliferation of pavement, the fencing, it just makes it more urban in character, and the fundamental purpose and the value of the park as an antithesis and an antidote to the city is somewhat diminished. Over by where the stream course and the lock had entered the Meer, you see more evidence of, in this period, from this project, of the hardening. So that naturalistic stream course that had come out of Huddlestone Arch and entered the Meer is reinforced. That rustic bridge is replaced with a more modern masonry bridge. And this is all kind of reinforcing the landscape in order to just deal with use and maintenance and add more facilities for recreation. Culminating in the 1960s with the addition of the Lasker Pool and Rink. This is the Lula D. Lasker Memorial Rink and Pool, and we'll just take a minute here. It's a little bit of a digression, but into who was Lula Lasker, and more importantly, how did this facility come to be built in the park in her name? It's an interesting story, and it kind of speaks to sort of the culture and the thinking of the time. So Lula D. Lasker was a social worker and a philanthropist. She was the sister of Albert Lasker, and Albert Lasker was a very successful advertising magnate, and the facility was funded partially from Lula's estate. So how exactly did this come about? As I said, Albert Lasker was also known as the man who sold America. He was a successful, very famous advertising magnate, and he was married to a woman named Mary Lasker. Albert and Mary Lasker had a foundation, and through Mary's interest, they were very supportive. Their foundation and it still exists, primarily funds medical research, but Mary also had a real interest in parks, and so she funded work in the Conservatory Garden, the Park Avenue malls, and Mary was sisters with Alice, whose husband was an architect, Almond Fordyce, and Fordyce. Really through the 50s, while Robert Moses was commissioner, was advocating for a number of projects, including this very large pool and rink that would have also included a restaurant and a parking lot at the Harlem Meer. And, I think for many of us, for a long time, thought that Robert Moses was actually kind of behind the construction of Lasker Pool and Rink. He built pools, large pools throughout the city, largely in the 30s, a number of them. We know that he added, really kind of focused on purpose-built recreation facilities. But as it turns out, Robert Moses actually was opposed to the idea. And when Newbold Morris became commissioner in 1960, Newbold Morris, under Mayor Wagner and Newbold Morris actually were the ones who approved and accepted the gift and decided to build the rink. And Robert Moses actually said it was not an appropriate place for it, and not an appropriate design. But Mayor Wagner, you see here in the middle, Newbold Morris. If anybody else knows who any of these other people are, I'm happy to hear. I'm not sure who these other gentlemen are at the groundbreaking for the pool and rink in 1964. And just a couple of other shots, just because I think they're interesting from that event. You see that bridge that had replaced the rustic bridge. This whole site will now be built over as the pool and rink. And again, the groundbreaking event. I just like this shot because you also get a view of the stream course, how it had been sort of hardened, and people sitting on the wall of it. So the Lasker Pool and Rink is added. It's built between 1964 and 1966, and this is just showing overlaid on the 1873 map. It's showing how that overlaid and really filled in. It involved the fill of 2.5 acres of the Meer, and really kind of occupied the space between this curve of the drive. The water course, which had flown directly into the Meer, was diverted into a culvert that went around the side of the facility. And this model from the early 1960s gives you a sense. It's not the exact design, but it really does fill up the void, the ravine between the curve of the drive. And it had actually disastrous results from the beginning. This is a photo in 1966. The rink was scheduled to open in early March of 1966, and in February was the first time that first of many times that severe rains resulted in extreme flooding. It entered the building and destroyed all the mechanical equipment. So the opening was delayed for the better part of 10 months. So it's really kind of just a serious kind of technical miscalculation in terms of dealing with the hydrology of the site. But it did open in 1966, and here by now, John Lindsay is mayor, and that's his Parks Commissioner, Thomas Hoving, breaking in the ice in December of 1966 on opening day. And it was a valuable community resource, for its, the problems with its siting, and the kind of the flaws with its engineering and design. Once you were inside, it actually was, was built for, to serve the community, and it did serve the community as both a rink, and then this is the first summer of the pool in June of 1967 when it opened. But it really was the culmination of kind of this era of the Meer becoming more built up, more hardened, and more urbanized. And you can see next to the boathouse, an additional concession facility had been added. By the late 70s, though, the programming at the boathouse and the concessions were there were no longer resources, and there was no longer a concession, so they were boarded up. So you can see it's been sort of built up. You can see all of the fencing that had been added over the years. And then it just starts to deteriorate. So this is a shot in the early 1980s, and you can see the paths are starting to deteriorate, the playgrounds. And by 1989, the boathouse is burned out. You can see even a concrete shoreline, it does deteriorate, and so you can see the deterioration. And it's at this time in 1989 that the Conservancy launched a project, the largest project at that point that the Conservancy had taken on to restore the Meer. The boathouse. And so between the period of 1989 and 1992, the Meer is restored. The kind of naturalistic character of the shoreline and of the landscape is returned. And in place of kind of the large boathouse and the concession facilities, the Dana Discovery Center, out of which kind of nature-based programs are operated. And just really bringing the Meer back to that essential initial idea of the park as being a place for people who live their, much of their lives in the city to get away from the urban character and sort of the concrete and the streets and the hardness, and to experience something like being in nature. And so this is how the Meer really serves the community around it today. Exploring nature. It's a place to, the families can go and find wildlife, turtles, fishing. We have a catch and release fishing program that we run out of the Dana Discovery Center, but we give out bamboo rods. So this is a kid who probably lives in the neighborhood, and this is not one of our rods. He has his own, his own fishing rod. So, just kind of nice to think that a kid who really lives in New York City can, take a walk to the park and go fishing. Another one. Canoeing, the park rangers now run programs, canoeing programs in the summer. There's no longer a boating concession. I think just in terms of the scale of the lake, of the Meer, which was, which was kind of reduced from what it initially was with the addition of Lasker. And when you saw the image with all the boats on it, and the size of a facility to run boating out of, that canoeing is kind of lighter on the landscape, but is still can be a really valuable recreational program, particularly for city kids, for school children. Birding. And of course, our playgrounds. And the playgrounds, this playground here, 110th Street Playground, what I love about this photo is we're in a playground. This little boy is playing, in a playground, but he's also in the park. And this is how we approach, how we deal with facilities nowadays in the park when we're working on restoration and reconstruction. So when we rebuilt this playground, the Conservancy redid this playground in around 2013. This was the playground before. And in redesigning it, just this idea that facilities in Central Park should feel like they're in the park, and people, people within the playground and outside, that it should be an integrated experience, and you should. The idea being that we don't want the facilities in the park, and this was not the idea of the park, to just be a campus for these inward isolated facilities. So as we think about Lasker Pool and Rink, which I'm sure many of you know is currently has been demolished, and we are in the process of redeveloping. Once you got into Lasker Pool, it was this wonderful, this wonderful experience of being out in the open, and in the park, and in this large body of water in the skating season, both recreational skating, hockey. But the facility itself, and when we began to work on this project a few years ago, it was because the facility itself was really was failing. We've always had these problems that we mentioned with the flooding. In addition, the pool bottom was compromised by the fact that it was a skating rink. So the freezing and within the bottom of the pool, the pipes, the freezing and thawing created cracks, so the pool leaks. The mechanical equipment was outdated, and it really was really required kind of a complete overhaul. And the existing facility, kind of didn't meet modern codes and requirements for accessibility and for sustainability. So, and in addition to that, we're talking about all of the users of the park. So these numbers here are annual attendance. The pool and rink serves, approximately 220,000 people a year. But just thinking about the landscapes on either side, the Harlem Meer, about 2.5 million visits. The North Woods, about 2 million visits. So thinking about the impact of this facility, and then the periods when the building is closed. This is a little bit of a confusing diagram, but between the end of October and mid-March is when the facility operates as a rink and it's open. And then there's these months between when it's a pool, from the end of June to early September. There's these months when the entire facility, the building, the whole facility is just shut down. So the idea of making something that's more accessible and year round. A more pleasant experience once you get into the pool. It's wonderful to be in the pool, but the line to get in order to show your lock and get into the pool, you have to go through this process. And it's in the blaring sun up between this wall and the drive. So the existing facility, in reimagining it and thinking about the future of the Meer, we wanted to integrate the facility and still provide the skating and swimming, but make it more accessible and better integrate it. So the proposed or in construction pool will be a longer, narrower pool. It enables us to reconnect the stream course and fix that problem with the constant flooding and the hydrology, reconnect the path from under Huddlestone Arch to the Meer. The building, which currently, which was kind of a wall and a barrier that was backed up against Huddlestone Arch, will actually be built into the slope along the drive, and then a green roof carry across it so that the building is underneath. And importantly, the facility will be open year round, and people will be able to move through, except when it's a pool. When it's used as a pool because of health code, because of pool protocols, you can't. People can't walk through this side when it's a pool or go into the building for the 2 months plus months that it is a pool. But the rest of the year, people will be able to move through and around and into the building and the open space. And to give you a sense of how that works, and this is a sense of the building under that green roof, that landscape that carries across. This is showing when it's a pool, but between the pool and rink seasons, when it's not a pool, I should say, it will be decked over and just become usable space. And people will be able to, anybody will be able to walk through, go into the building, use this space year round. And then during the skating season, the rink will come in and be added on top. And again, the rest of the space in the building will be accessible to everybody year round. So just to give you a sense of what that does is, the building will be a year-round facility, and in these in-between periods, we'll have this flexible use. A sense of what it will look like, looking across the pool towards that green roof and the building, and a section through. A large gathering space with pivoting floor-to-ceiling doors to let in light and a skylight, and then the circulation and the lockers and restrooms and support spaces in the back, and the green roof on top. So in the summer season, in the in-between season, and in the skating season. And then just stepping back for a second to the larger plan, we're also will be looking to create a more naturalistic experience and a more integrated experience along the water's edge. So where that path had been added in the 1940s, excavating some of that fill and taking down that retaining wall to create a boardwalk over open water and marshland plantings. Zooming in a little bit gives you a sense. And so this is the existing path, and this will be kind of a place to stroll. It will be a place to fish from, to experience the improved habitat and the wildlife that comes with it. A view back formerly, and the new boardwalk. And then finally, the connection to the North Woods. We talked about that beautiful landscape back there. It's been restored in recent years, and many people that we speak to at the Harlem Meer who use the landscape, who maybe even live right around the park, who use the Harlem Meer landscape, people who swim in the pool. One of the things that we find is that people in this area have no idea what's on the other side of Huddlestone Arch back here. And this is what's back there, and it's a beautiful, recently restored landscape that really does, I think more than any place else in the park, what the park is meant to do, which is transport people and really make you be able to walk into a place in the park and feel like you don't see or hear the city, and that you have kind of gone someplace else that is not the city. Open pools of water. We have this kind of final cascade. And then again, Huddlestone Arch, approaching Huddlestone Arch at that angle that was designed to be that way so that you would wonder what's on the other side. And as you walked through, historically, here's a little montage of what you would have seen the rest of that water course and that bridge and the Meer. And in more recent years, this is what you would see when you walked through the arch. And with as we look toward the future, this is what it will be. You'll be able to continue walking along that water course to the Meer, or turn to the right and go into the new Harlem Meer facility. And where we have these steep stairs that if you emerged from Huddlestone Arch, you wouldn't necessarily know what was on the other side, or be sure if you should go up those stairs. Will be a continuous path along the stream course to bring you to the Harlem Meer. And then once you get there, turning around and looking back, this is the view today. And it'll be something like this. So just wanted to end on a shot that we have of right as we were starting construction. This is this past September. So I know that many of you probably have been in the park and have been watching the work progress, but probably not from this angle. So this was in September. This is just last week. So the work progressing to shape the landscape, to excavate in order to integrate that new facility, and then really create, envelop it in a whole landscape and stream course and green area that will surround it, that will look something like this. And that's my story of the Harlem Meer, and I would love to entertain any questions, and apologies for the technical glitches at the beginning.
Well, thank you so much, Lane. That was a great presentation. Let's see. We do have a few questions that came up, and I will bring them up as they were asked. Also, if anyone feels free to ask on the Q&As, or if you want to say something, you can raise your hand and I will unmute you.
Michael, there were many questions in the chat.
Yes.
If you could pick up.
So one of the first questions was, do you know the source of the rivulet for Montaigne's rivulet before it became fed by the reservoir water?
Yeah, so Montaigne's rivulet, it entered the park at West 100th Street, and it was from the west side, probably. Maybe you can tell me technically what the boundaries of Bloomingdale are, because it might even be, it was from a spring on the Upper West Side, maybe within the Bloomingdale neighborhood.
Well, the Bloomingdale, it absolutely is in the Bloomingdale neighborhood.
Yeah.
However, it's spread, which it has during the various buildings. The stream has been, it's not just in one route. It has spread out, and its flow has changed as construction has taken place. But the
Yes.
Bloomingdale area runs from 96 to 110th, and we're really not fussy about the borders. Central Park West to the river,
Hmm.
to the Hudson River. So we
Yeah.
can claim it wherever it is almost.
Right, right.
But you had said something, I'll pursue this a little bit, if I may. You had said something about it's not flowing so much anymore. And that isn't our experience during the
Yeah.
construction that's taken place here, both in Park West Village and subsequently.
Well, the water in the park, at least, and you know, my understanding of also of Montaigne's Rivulet is that it was an ephemeral stream course in the park. And you know, for a number of years, just because of the design and how old it is, actually figuring out what the water is flowing through the pool and the lock and the Meer is you know, has been a little bit of a mystery for us, for Department of Environmental Protection, which you know, manages the reservoirs. And when we have done testing of the water quality, what we have found is that the water quality of the water flowing through that system, through the pool, the lock, and the Meer, in dry weather, so when there's no storm inputs, it's mostly city water. So it's very and so that suggested to us that there does not seem to be any significant input from a natural stream course.
Well, let's pursue this offline.
Mhm.
Come on over and we'll show you the stream that runs through the Trinity Research.
Yeah, well, yeah, and if that's Montaigne's Rivulet, then it's gotten diverted someplace else. Yeah.
And Target will tell you that 3 weeks after their opening, they were inundated and had to close because of basement water. And that's the area where we had dug down 60 feet, at which point we had ducks moving in. So there is water around here.
Yeah.
So someone asked a similar question, actually was asking if that was the same stream. So you also answered that along the way. Another question was, do you know if there was a settlement that used to be where the Harlem Meer happened, that got replaced or displaced during the construction?
Did you say was there a settlement?
Yeah, was there a settlement
Yeah.
there before?
You know, there were in the northern end of the park, there were a few, there was not what's the word I'm looking for? Concentrated village, but there were some farmsteads up in this area. So there wasn't a village like, say, on the west side, we had Seneca Village. That was the largest concentration of residents in the park. When the land for the park was taken through eminent domain, there were approximately 1,600 residents in Central Park throughout the whole park, and the largest concentration was Seneca Village, which was about 225 people in 1855, and the rest were kind of scattered. A number of farms. There was a convent, which was up right, actually fairly close to the forts and McGowan's Pass, which was the Order of Mount St. Vincent. That's the area right behind the conservatory garden known as the Mount. So that probably would have been the second sort of densest group of people.
Someone asked about do you know what happened around the park, I guess, or in the park areas around the Depression or during the Depression for the shanty towns, etc.?
Yeah. Well, yeah. So it sounds like maybe the person with this question might have heard of or seen photos of in the old reservoir, which is where the Great Lawn is now. So when the land for the park was taken, there was an existing reservoir from 1842, which was the old Croton Reservoir, and they were building the new Croton Reservoir, which is the reservoir that's there today. in the late 1920s, actually, I think it started in 1929. The old reservoir had been decommissioned and was being drained. It was a rectangular masonry reservoir where the Great Lawn is now. So it had been drained, and there was a Hooverville for a number of years in the drained basin of the old reservoir before it was developed as the Great Lawn.
Got it. Follow-up question, or no, a different question was, do you know how the fish in Harlem Meer got there?
So I think I believe, I don't know what the proportion would be. For many years, fish were stocked in the Harlem Meer, so the Parks Department. And I tried to actually find this out today because I somehow had a feeling, oftentimes when I'm giving tours up here, I'm getting questions about the fish, and I had a feeling, but I'm not sure when the last time was that that anybody stocked the Harlem Meer with fish. Used to be done somewhat regularly. And then, I think that they also can kind of find their way in through the aqueduct system. And people may also contribute fish.
And
Yes.
they breed.
What was that, Wynn?
They breed. They're
Well,
babies.
yes, and that they breed, so
They-
some should be, at least some portion should be descendants from the last time the water bodies were stocked.
Got it. So with the new remodeling of the pool, do you know it will no longer be called Lasker Rink? Do you know the future, the name for it going forward?
We don't have a name yet, so we're calling it the Harlem Meer Center right now, just as a placeholder. I don't really like the Harlem Meer Center because it's not, and yet we were saying Harlem Meer Outdoor Center for a while, but outdoor center seems a little, yeah.
Got it. Can you speak to the evolution of thinking of the park as an ecosystem, the benefits of the people beyond recreation and consideration of rights and the needs for other humans who are part of the community?
Yeah, and I think my understanding of the question is the park as an ecosystem, but we're talking about as people.
People, yeah, and other animals also as part of the community.
Yeah, yeah. And I think the park was created on with sort of these it was sort of like a very ambitious ideals about and at the time kind of progressive thinking about the idea of democratic space, the idea that and if you kind of go back and read at the time the park was created, the discussion of this, it was considered a pretty bold and experiment, and there was some critique of whether it would be successful. The idea that you would just have a place, a park that would really be for everybody, that was the ideal. At the same time, it was a place that was of its time. So society, was not, had not progressed to the point that we are now. So I think, was, who over time has really had access to the park and who has really kind of felt that the park belongs to them is something that we're really, very, focused on, even as we try to restore and rebuild and sustain and maintain the park towards that ideal of being, because I think it is still the value of this place that was so brilliantly designed that it can transport people to feel that they are, that they've left the stresses of their everyday life in a place that can be, difficult to live. And then at the same time, there are these kind of layers of uses and users and things that people have, increasingly expect to also want to do in the park. So, I think we really, in approaching it as an ecosystem, before we even talk about the animal, the wildlife, is kind of thinking about it in that way, is how do these things relate to each other and affect each other, that we have very specific purposes and facilities, but that there is this bigger idea that is kind of guides everything we do, and that's really valuable. And I think we still kind of, I think when you talk to people about their emotional connection to the park, it's often about when they, the place that they go when they need to think, or they've they've had a really difficult moment in their life, or they, but then there's this other side where there's, whether it's birders or lap swimmers, or there's also the communities of people that are around a particular use and a particular activity, and those are really valuable too. So it's trying to make those things function together, in an ecosystem. And then I would say that we just do have, and when I say we, I mean people today, and design professionals and ecologists and engineers, and just a much more sophisticated understanding now than 160 years ago of habitat and of ecology and of native plants, and of how to make a place more environmentally sustainable for people and for wildlife.
Thank you. Do you know if the Conservancy will or has released any of the interior designs for the new pool / rink?
The interior design. So I'm not sure if that question is about the interior of the building or which.
They just wanted, I guess, just details of the interior. I'm not entirely sure either. It might just be over.
Right.
Yeah.
So we have, in some of our, we have, when we were presenting through the public review process for the project, we showed, we didn't get into detailed floor plans because there's only kind of so much time, and that's not the focus of the public review process. So if they're talking about floor plans, we have not, but as we kind of continue to get closer, it's summer of 2024 is our opening, and I think we can sort of start in anticipation of opening the facility, start to kind of show more of what we think it will look like inside.
Are you still open to suggestions from the users? Or is it...
So, well, the space is designed, but for things details, like I know there have been questions about things like mirrors and clocks, and certainly kind of operational aspects. Yeah.
Is that a yes?
Yes. but the actual plans themselves to construct the space are well underway. So.
Oh, go ahead. When
It's all right. I know who asked the question, and we're both swimmers there, so vested interests here.
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
go ahead, Michael. Back to you. I'm just.
Thank you. How will the decking around the Meer work? Will it be floating or will it be cemented, I guess? There are piers and footings, so it's not floating. Someone wanted to mention the invasive species that happened in the Meer a few years ago. It was a certain fish that signs were placed up to oppose catch and release.
Yeah. Was that a question or just wanted to?
they just wanted
Yeah.
to bring that up.
Yeah.
And then
I think I know what they're talking about. I don't think that it's been spotted again since, but I believe that we still have signs up that if you do see it, not to release it.
yes. How has climate change influenced the planning of, and use of the area?
Oh, that's a big one. I mean, I think, certainly, certainly from a resiliency, urban resiliency and cooling of the urban heat island perspective, certainly greening and more vegetation and reducing permeable surfaces, which by having building the building into the landscape, having a green roof, having the kind of benefits of the heating and cooling and solar benefits of the building being within integrated into the landscape, and the green roof is helpful. And we've increased within the footprint of the site. We've increased the permeable or decreased the impermeable surfacing by about 50%, and that's all those are all positives. That's somewhat about climate change, but also just about environmental sustainability. But these things are all kind of interrelated.
With the new design, can you talk how that will affect the weighting to get into the pool as opposed to how it is now?
Was that the weighting WAI?
No, waiting line to get into the pool.
Yeah. Okay. So there's always a line to get into the pool, and for both the morning and the afternoon session, just because there is there's a checkpoint, and it is Parks Department public pool, and there's people have to have a lock in order to be able to go in and use their lockers, and they have to make sure that they check what people are bringing in. So there is, there's always a single point of entry, and I think the speed of kind of people getting in. I think that probably the question is maybe kind of asking, because the pool is smaller, it's about 75%. It is still an Olympic-sized pool. There will still be 50-meter lap swimming, and that may be the question. We do know that on most days there's not a wait, and then it has tended to be on weekends, where extremely hot weather on weekends and holidays, and that in recent years has happened once or twice a year, that there's a moment in time where the pool is at its capacity and people can't come in until somebody goes out. So that may happen a few more times a year. It still means that that most of the time, the pool is not being obviously used to capacity. So we're balancing the pool use with the impact on the rest of the park, and recreating that stream course connection, and making the natural systems and the circulation and accessibility all work.
Got it. With the pool being out of commission for a couple of years due to construction, what would you recommend for the people who were frequent users of the pool in the summers?
Yeah. So the one kind of fortunate thing about where we are located is that Northern Manhattan actually does have a number of large and Olympic-sized pools. So there's and we do have them listed on our website, and so that link that I think we provided lists all their locations. But there is Thomas Jefferson Pool at East 116th Street. There's Marcus Garvey. There's Highbridge Pool. So there are kind of in this area, fortunately, more large public pools than in any other part of the city. So, and if folks go to our website, we've listed them there.
I just placed it on the chat.
And as a refugee from Alaska, I've been using Marcus Garvey, and it's very nice. And not crowded.
That's great to hear.
Yeah, if anyone else has any more questions. Oh, we just got one. Oh, someone mentioned it's not a good year to have a lifeguard shortage. If you guys know any lifeguards, ask them to apply, or swimmers.
That's been an immigration question too, when they stopped allowing people to come to the States for the summer. Many of them were lifeguards at Lasker, as a matter of fact. Anyway, that's getting us to another subject. Lane, thank you. Is there anything more you'd like to add to this? Because it's been a wonderful presentation. Many thanks.
Oh, well, so I just, the one thing that I would want to add is, if you are not familiar with the Meer, and we do have, this project is under construction, so a portion of the Meer is a little bit busy with construction now, but there's plenty more of it, and I just would encourage folks, if you have not, to come visit, and also particularly if you were a swimmer at Lasker, but never kind of came to the park to, say, go into the North Woods. Want to make more people just aware of this, this wonderful landscape back there, where, as I think I was saying to one of you the other day, even though we don't have Lasker Pool for, or a pool in the park for another couple of years, if you walk back into the North Woods on a hot day, it's between the water and the shade, it's 15 degrees cooler, and it's just a wonderful place to be. So I would really encourage folks to go.
That is quite true. And none of us has mentioned the concerts on the Meer, which are also listed on the park's website. So
yes, the Harlem Meer Performance Festival, every Sunday through the summer.
All right, well, thank you so much. I think that's, we have one last question if you have time, Lynn.
Yes.
In your career in Central Park Conservancy, what is the capital project / renovation that you feel most proud of?
Oh,
that's
yeah. See, and proud. I would say to be a part of, because really, as I said before, I'm not the design professional. I just work with them, but I don't want to say this one just because it's not done yet, and I feel like it's bad luck somehow when something's not done yet. Although I will have to say, like, this was certainly the project that is probably the most transformative, and that many of us kind of, who have worked in the park for a long time, and who have, talked to people who, and known people and talked to people who kind of looked to the facility and saw, couldn't this be something better, and we didn't think we'd ever have the opportunity to kind of improve the situation there. So I'm very happy that we've had a chance to work on this project. I really do love that playground that I showed you, which is also in this area, the 110th Street playground, because playgrounds are not original to the park, but just because these facilities are not original doesn't mean that they can't be done in a way that you can kind of provide the types of recreation resources that people need and want, and still do it in a way that is kind of consistent with what the park is and feels like you're in the park. So I would say that East 110th Street playground is a favorite of mine. Thank you for asking.
Well, thank you for the presentation. And Michael and Nancy, thank you, and actually thank the whole planning group of the Bloomingdale Neighborhood History Group. We all work on these presentations. Please come. They're almost once a month. Check our website for other resources as well. And thank you very much for tonight.